This episode is brought to you by Shopify. That's the sound of switching your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling. Harness the best converting checkout and same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Stop leaving sales on the table. Discover why millions trust Shopify to build, grow, and run their business. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech23.
Hey everyone, this is Vicki Connor.
And I'm Jamie Hale. We're getting closer to 2024 and looking forward to another year of Pacific Northwest travel. And as we make our travel plans, we want to know all about the places that you want to see and all the things that you want to do.
If you have any fun travel plans or questions about places to travel, let us know. On our upcoming New Year's episode, we'll be covering all of your great ideas as well as some travel ideas of our own. You can email your travel plans, dreams, and questions to podcasts@oregonian.com.
But for now, on to this week's episode. Hello, hello. Welcome back to Peak Northwest, an outdoors and travel podcast by the Oregonian and Oregon Live, dedicated to the adventure and exploration of our beautiful Pacific Northwest. I'm Jamie Hale.
And I'm Vicki Connor. Together, we take you to some of the most beautiful and interesting destinations in our region, discussing where to go, what to do, and places to see. And today, we are tackling a big question that many hikers have. Does social media lead to overcrowding on Oregon's trails?
I get this question, Vicki, constantly. It is one of the things I've had. I get so many angry emails all the time. And usually it's directed at me as the Oregonian. It's always, you've written about this trail. Now it's going to be ruined. People are going to flock to it. It's going to be, quote unquote, those people who ruin it. I don't know what that means. Everyone seems to think if you post a picture of a place on Instagram or other social media, or you write about it, it's just ruined. Everyone's going to show up and the secret is out. I like to tell people that I'm here to ruin their secret spots because it's public land and public land should be publicly available to all, not just those with the information about it. But this is something that people get really, really freaked out about. And something that I have sort of seen just in my experience is not actually happening. I have not seen Instagram or me or other people talking about a place actually correlating with that place being overcrowded or overrun. But that's just my experience, of course.
Right. Totally. And being on our social and visuals team, I have seen those comments as well. And of course, as journalists, we don't want to rely just on anecdotal evidence, but thankfully, there's some research recently done out of Oregon State University on this exact issue. And on today's show, we have a pair of researchers behind this study. Joining us today is Ashley Lowe-McKenzie and Steve Dundas, who are here to try and settle this issue once and for all. Ashley, Steve, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having us.
Happy to be here.
So just to start us off and talking about this, why did you choose to study this topic?
I entered the PhD program at Oregon State University and was hunting for a topic to spend 4 to 6 years of my life researching. And as a person who's done the Pacific Crest Trail, Continental Divide, I was really interested in this aspect because I've heard the same stories. Is social media is the cause of all of the increases everywhere, while the book was the increases of the through hiking on the Pacific Crest Trail, and I was interested in the topic.
And Steve, what about you? How did you come into working on this project?
I was Ashley's dissertation advisor. I have worked on the impacts of climate change on outdoor recreation decisions previously with a study about marine recreational fishing on the Gulf and Atlantic coasts. So when Ashley came to me and said, hey, I have this idea, I really want to investigate with data how Instagram might be affecting how people interact with public lands, I was fully supportive and I immediately agreed to be her advisor. Next step was that she figured out this cool way to use publicly available Instagram data to collect information on all the posts that were being made that had georeferenced locations or geotags. So she could attach all the content on publicly available content on Instagram to places of interest in our public lands. And just with that initial idea, I became immediately supportive and helped drive the research agenda on this topic.
Were you looking just specifically at geotags? Were you looking at hashtags as well? What was kind of included in that data that you were sorting through?
I began looking at both hashtags and geotags. And in some of my first initial investigations, especially at Smith Rock, I looked at comparing the explanatory power of the the post on Instagram that focused just on hashtag Smith Rock, which was, I clarified and made sure that it was Smith Rock, Oregon, and the difference explanatory power of just using geotags. And what I found in that particular analysis was that geotags were more representative of what was happening on the ground at that location. It made me feel confident on exploring the geotagging because it helped me know that I was looking at the data at that specific location. One thing I think that occurs in hashtags versus geotags is that you get a lot of ambiguous kind of content that is coming up. People planning their trips, people attaching it to communities that maybe like that area, like the climbing community at Smith Rock. And geotags really kind of just remove that abstract kind of content from Instagram.
Well, I don't want to bury the lead too much here, but what did you find in this study? What was the conclusion that you reached?
Well, what we found was that Instagram wasn't having impacts to all locations across the board. So if you post a photo on Instagram, it doesn't automatically mean that that place is going to have visitation increases, but it really is going to be determinate on the engagement that's happening online at that particular location. So specific parks that went viral on Instagram, those parks we could see kind of this this impact to visitation that we can link to content online.
So we used 18 years of visitation data from 50 different Oregon state parks. So Oregon state parks were the kind of unit of analysis here for this study. And then we had 8 years of the public available content from Instagram, which were classified two different ways. So we classified simply the number of uploads. So like the content, how much the volume of content was going up at each park. But as Ashley mentioned, we also looked at the engagement, which in Instagram, it's the number of likes a particular post received, to then serve as the two indicators that we looked at to say, well, what part of the Instagram delivery system is potentially associated with visitation. And the interesting thing was that it wasn't the volume; it was simply the cumulative effect of high engagement posts. So places like Smith Rock, Silver Falls, Oswald West, and Ecola state parks that had images that got spread all over Instagram, had thousands of likes. It's that type of content that we were able to associate with small increases in visitation. So we didn't see increases across the board at all state parks, but really only in those 4 parks that I mentioned.
And you said small increases in visitation. So are you saying that there wasn't at any of these parks like enormous jumps that you could track directly back to engagement on social media?
I would say no, Smith Rock being one of the major ones, you could attribute, I think it was about 4% per month of the visitation to that park from just the highly engaging content that was being shared online. Now, it doesn't account for all of visitation growth, but it accounted for an amount that we could see over time from Instagram on.
Yeah, our data is the visitation data is at monthly time steps. So we the data simply doesn't allow us to see kind of direct correlations between a viral post and like an episodic burst in visitation. So that's one of the drawbacks, the limitations of the data environment that we're working in here. Um, and it remains like areas of future research. What's the temporal dimension of social media content, and how does it translate to real world behavior? We tried to capture that by measuring viral content cumulatively. That was a variable that we used to measure it, but it remains challenging to get the timing right on, when content gets high engagement and we see that visitation increase. I mean, that's still an open question.
As as we said, that 4% is pretty small. That leaves another 96% of growth not attributed to Instagram specifically or social media specifically. Where do you think that other growth comes from? So when people are seeing increases of crowds at Ecola, at Smith Rock, at these places, where else might those increases be coming from, if not from Instagram?
So I do think it could come from other social media sites, right? There could be things that use engagement, that to keep their users engaged are likely having an impact. So that could include things like TikTok, Snapchat, YouTube, other different types of media that are highlighting those areas. Um, different types of behaviors like van life, those becoming really popular. The increase in enjoyment in rock climbing could be attributed to those. The growing demographic of retired population could also attribute to some of the increase into those areas.
Yeah, it's important to note the other things that we accounted for in the model that estimated the 4%. So we do include gas prices to account for travel costs, right? If it becomes too expensive to go to the outdoors, maybe that previous studies have shown there's a direct correlation between travel cost and visitation. Population trends over time. Consider an area like Bend, the population there has exploded over the last 10, 15 years. So, population trends alone can explain a lot of the increase seen recently at places like Smith Rock. We also control for seasonal trends. Some places might have more visitation in the summer, some places might have more in the fall. We also control for economic conditions. In this particular study, we use monthly levels of Oregon's unemployment rate and also Zillow's housing value index to proxy for economic conditions that have previously been shown in other studies to correlate with visitation trends as well. So taking all those things into account and trying to isolate the effect of Instagram was where our study fit in.
As well as daily temperature at that location.
I'd be remiss to say that, weather it also plays a role, and we included weather, daily weather in our models.
So, I guess, why do you think that there's this disconnect between the perception and reality?
Yeah, I mean, there are two. We can think about our research can't point to a mechanism of why this is happening. Our two hypotheses are, a reduction in search and information costs. Having a smartphone in your pocket with an app that can give you the geo coordinates of a vista or trailhead easily, could be, inspiring and enabling new people to get out into the outdoors quickly. Ashley began hitting on the other mechanism, which was kind of the bandwagon effect. People see others enjoying this place and having their own content and want to also participate in that. One aspect that I think our research points to that is important to recognize here is the power of kind of viral content. And even though we don't observe this in this study as influencers, there's a specific kind of content that is likely the culprit of seeing these visitation increases. And I don't know, I think it's similar to what we're seeing with economic data across the country right now. There's a first time in history there's been a disconnect between actual economic indicators and consumer confidence, right? So there's the social media, misinformation, all those things maybe play in to create a disconnect between what the data says and what people perceive.
Well, we know that there are so many more people at a lot of these outdoor recreation areas. I mean, we've seen the state park data a lot of national park data. I mean, and just people's anecdotal experiences of being somewhere, especially folks who have been here for, generations. They're used to going to a certain place and having it all to themselves, and all of a sudden they're sharing it now with hundreds, thousands of other people. That's a really anxiety-inducing experience for a lot of people, and it causes a lot of fear of, this place that was my, quiet paradise is now spoiled. Is now I have to share it with all these other people. It's cramped. It's crowded. And when looking for a culprit as to why this has happened, as you two mentioned, there's a lot of reasons why places are getting more crowded: population, economic indicators, generational stuff, people retiring early, millennials who are more interested in the outdoors and the lifestyle of that kind of recreational opportunity. So many things that it's hard to get your hands around it. And so, where do you put your blame? Where do you put your anger that you're experiencing? Instagram's a really easy culprit, isn't it? Because we see it, all of us, we're on there all the time. You see the pictures coming up, and oh, here's another person posting about Smith Rock, and another person. Here's an influencer at Smith Rock. I think it's a way that really grabs our attention. It's a really easy source of our anger, as opposed to this really complex reality.
I agree with that 100%. And I'll share an anecdote from being in Mount Rainier National Park this summer. My own anger at seeing, folks with pretty expensive camera gear, obviously there for social media reasons, trampling over wildfire meadows up near Paradise. It points to this fundamental problem of our public lands, where we have lack of funding, lack of staff, maintenance backlogs, and then this, whatever the cause, huge increase in people wanting to visit these places. And it's just creating this just fundamental tension between providing this recreation opportunities for everybody on public land and managing the kind of ecosystems that exist there. So just personally, I can say, yeah, I've seen it. I've seen people do stupid things, do things that are degrading resources, all in search of that selfie that they can post on Instagram. So I can see why people react the way they do and place the blame on Instagram.
It's fascinating. There's all these disconnects. You mentioned Mount Rainier as a place that is not more crowded today than it was 20 years ago. If you look at that data, it's seen crowds of this size in the 90s, the 70s, but the way that people are visiting is triggering something in people that is more aggravating. It's maybe perhaps more disrespectful of the environment, or less respectful of staff, or maybe there's fewer staff to handle everyone. I know Crater Lake had this huge uptick in rescues from people trying to climb down into the lake, which is insane. And they had to put out a news release saying, folks, don't do this. And their staff was overtaxed, even though their numbers of visitors are going down. It might feel like it's going up, or might feel like a more dire circumstance, just because of the ways in which people are visiting these places. All these interesting sort of cognitive dissonances that are happening here, but it seems like that there is a very real difference in the way that people are existing in parks. Do you think that has anything to do with our sort of social media landscape that has arisen over the last decade or so?
I mean, for sure. Yeah, there's like those stories of like selfie death traps, like in the Grand Canyon, Yosemite as well. That perception and those news articles and the headlines that come out clearly have like kind of entered the public psyche, um, placing the blame definitely on Instagrammers and those types of people seeking outdoor recreational opportunities.
I think talking with land managers, we're seeing a lot of people who, potentially don't understand leave no trace principles, are not versed on traveling into the backcountry. I mean, it presents both a safety issue, like you hear anecdotes of people attempting like to hike down to the bottom of Grand Canyon in flip-flops without any water. And it creates stress on, the land managers, the staff that's there, when people are unprepared for kind of the experiences that they're seeking out.
Do you think this will be something that is continued to be studied, especially with other forms of social media as well?
I hope so. The difficulty is like getting the data. The For this project, I contacted Meta, I think 4 times, trying to talk and work with them. I have yet to receive an email over the 6 or 7 years. So it kind of, I think, depends on accessibility to be able to research this. It was pretty difficult to do the type of data collection that I did to be able to do this research.
There is a second paper that we are working on at the national scale using the similar data from national parks. It hasn't been peer reviewed yet, but if you're interested, I'm sure Ashley can give you a quick summary.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's hear it. What can you tell us right now about it?
So I've looked at about, I think it's 40 national parks. So, there's 62, but I kind of excluded some of the difficult ones, Alaska, Hawaii. But looking across those 40 national parks, we find really similar kind of plotted out visualizations of which parks went viral. So you kind of have a pretty similar kind of graph. Some parks went really viral, some parks didn't. And you can find those impacts that we see at the Oregon State Parks level in the national parks. But furthermore, with that larger kind of data set, we've investigated the mechanism of what's increasing engagement online. So whether is it just the pure informational kind of information that they're sharing with the individual users within like the caption, or is it the behavior, the type of behavior the person's expressing, opinions about the location, their own individual behavior on posting online. And what the kind of preliminary results are suggesting is that it has to do more with behavior than it does with just the information alone. So it's not just sharing a location. Again, it's what type of individual are you online sharing with your user base? And so I can't really necessarily identify the influencers again. That's kind of more private meta information. But people who are avid users on Instagram are kind of having this wider impact on a broader set of parks than just engagement alone.
And other things that Ashley found here was the sentiment. If there was positive or negative sentiment expressed, that also seemed to uptick engagement, as well as trailheads and other specific information. But the big driver was kind of this: if it was posted by an avid user, which is our proxy for influencer, even though we can't directly observe who has a monetized account and who doesn't.
I could say though that the incentive to post a lot and to get engagement include all monetized accounts, right? Because that's how they make money, is they post a lot and they post often and they are seeking out engagement.
Do you think that the Oregonians' Instagram account would count as one of those accounts that would be more likely to drive more visitors to a park? I guess this is a way to ask, how much is it my fault that some of these places get overcrowded?
You know, it only takes to be, if you look at, let's say, all of the posts at a like all of the posts in a given year, and what it takes to get in the top 10% of posts on Instagram through the time period we were looking at. This is, from 2010 to 2019. It only takes about 120 likes to be pretty influential in that top 10%. So potentially.
Cool. Uh, but as you said, and as we've talked about, while those kinds of posts can lead to more visitors, it is such a small percentage of what is leading more visitors all over. So I guess, so if someone comes into my DMs or sends me an email or comments that like, hey, you're ruining Ecola State Park, which has happened, can I just say, here's this study from Oregon State University to tell you that you're wrong? Is that fair of me to do?
Yes.
Great.
Yeah, you can send them our way. We'll take the hate mail.
Yeah, and at the national park level, like going back to that retiree population that I kind of mentioned, when looking at that demographic change, it accounted for a lot of the visitation growth in the last few years at that national level. So, yes.
Great. So when people blame me, I'll just blame the baby boomers instead. always a good scapegoat. I love that. Well, this is such a fascinating topic, and definitely one I know people care passionately about. I know that there's someone listening who is going to say, like, I hear you, I get this, I see your data, but I just feel like you're wrong. I feel like Instagram is to blame for all of this. Do you have any sort of response or any advice for those perhaps more hard-headed people?
I think that's a fair reaction to observed and lived experience. It's important to recognize that our study is one of many trying to look at this topic. It's important to recognize any one study doesn't have the definitive answer for any one problem. There's a lot of dynamics that we don't understand, as I mentioned earlier, like the timing between people being influenced by content and actually making a real world decision. There's a lot of dynamics at play that we don't account for here. We've gotten messages saying, well, I've been in the backcountry of Oregon my whole life, and just in the last 5 years, I'm seeing so many more people. That could simply be a displacement effect from congestion at more popular locations. People that were experienced are now moving further afield. There's a lot that we don't know.
Like, as a thru hiker and stuff, the one thing that has made life so much easier is just having a phone itself. Being able to know exactly where you are, you can access those places that are hard to reach more easily with your iPhone. Things like Far Out app has made trails like the Pacific Northwest, that is like 1/3 bushwhacks, extremely easy to do with very little map and compass kind of skills. So a lot of these factors are driving people further out in the backcountry than just one influencer. But they still did show an impact, though it's small.
And we can't say anything about the longevity of this effect. Usually in economic analyses like these, a lot of these effects are ephemeral or temporary, and we may see a reversion to the mean. We may see the effects calm down as preferences change and how we interact with social media changes. It's important to note that this study is about posts to Instagram. It doesn't include stories. It doesn't include reels. They've kind of changed, added features of how people can interact within the app that we don't account for in this study. The social media landscape is constantly evolving. So this was kind of a snapshot of like, hey, this is what happened in Oregon, in the first 8 years that Instagram was around. And we did kind of find an effect that people expected, but maybe not as large or as widespread as people might think, because there's a lot of factors that are at play here and why we might be loving our outdoors too much.
Well, that will do it for today. But until next time, you can watch our videos on the Oregonians YouTube channel and view all of our outdoors and travel coverage on OregonLive.com/travel, as well as HereIsOregon.com.
Please leave us a rating or review if you enjoy the show, and if you want to support this podcast as well as our local journalism, please consider a subscription to Oregon Live. You can find details at OregonLive.com/pod support. Also, if you're a fan of the show and you're potentially interested in sponsoring it, you can get in touch with our marketing people at advertise@oregonian.com. This episode of the show was produced by me, Vicki Connor, alongside Jamie Hale.
Stay safe and happy travels, everyone. Until next time, we leave you with this: 10 seconds.